us tonight will have access to the recording. So welcome officially, everyone. I'm Josephine Braun, the webinar coordinator for the Network for Ministry Development of the General Council of the United Church of Canada. I'll be introducing the webinar tonight and walking you through the technology from my church office here in Burlington, Ontario. The network is a new ministry of the United Church and holds much promise for networking, support, and encouragement for those in new and renewing ministries. We launch officially on Sunday, November 20th, and if you go to our website, and the link is provided on this screen in our discussion notes section, you'll have an opportunity to participate in our official launch on Sunday, November the 20th. The way the webinar will work tonight is our presenter, Tom Bandy, will be leading us through a PowerPoint presentation and stopping periodically for questions. You're free to type comments and questions at any time as you have them, and then we will try to address those as we stop for them throughout the presentation. The way that you can interact with this webinar is you can listen and watch the presentation and type your comments or questions using one of two functions. The first, the chat pod at the top left of the screen, as some have already started to use. Anything you type there in the bar at the bottom of the pod, and once you've typed your comment, you either press enter or the conversation bubble to the right, and that comment or question will be visible to everyone. If you have a question that you would specifically like to have answered during the presentation, we invite you to use the function at the bottom left of the screen, which is the question and answer pod. Just to let you know, an evaluation form will be sent out to you following the webinar. We do value your feedback and look to use that to improve the quality of the webinar experiences that we offer. So I'm happy tonight to present to you our presenter, Tom Bandy, who is speaking to us on the topic of applying demographic insights to shape seeker-sensitive ministries. Tom is an internationally recognized consultant, conference speaker, and leadership coach for Christian organizations and faith-based nonprofits. He is the president of Thriving Church Consulting, and you'll find the link to the website on the screen in front of you, and can be found in his virtual office at www.thrivingchurch.com. Tom is widely respected for his unique ability to understand diverse cultures, traditions, and denominational polities, and his grasp of systemic change and congregational mission. Denominational, congregational, and nonprofit leaders appreciate his ability to discern truth, clarify options, and guide leaders for spiritual growth and mission impact. Tom listens, teaches, and empowers leaders to follow Christ faithfully in a world of change. Tom has also been involved in academic theological teaching and has published over 16 books and numerous articles, as well as a variety of DVDs. Tom was born in Cleveland, Ohio, raised in many regions of the United States, and currently lives with his wife Lynn near Toronto, Ontario. Lynn is a pastor with over 30 years of experience, currently leading a growing church. They have been married for all that time and rejoice with 2 gifted children. If you haven't had an opportunity to do so, I will allow one more moment for you to upload the handout that Tom has prepared for us tonight, and then I will have to cover that bottom screen up so that we can continue with our PowerPoint presentation. The webinar tonight will be 1 hour, and once again we welcome all of you, and we especially welcome Tom. So without further ado, Tom, we invite you to say a few words and to begin our webinar.
Welcome, everybody. That's quite an introduction. Thank you, Josephine. In former times, I was the National Officer for Congregational Mission and Evangelism with the United Church of Canada, which took me traveling widely through most cities across Canada, from Labrador to Victoria and in between. So I hope that I'm familiar to some extent with many of the regional contexts in which you are doing ministry. More recently, I work cross-denominationally and cross-nationally, coaching leaders, and one such aspect of that is working with a demographic research company called missioninsight.com. That's the strategic planning book that I wrote for them, as well as the Lifestyle Segment Ministry Applications Guide. Tonight, I hope to share with you some insights into working with demographic material and how you can begin to think about applying those demographic insights to strategic planning for seeker-sensitive ministries. I want to begin by saying some things generally about demographic research, and then we'll explore a bit more specifically the Environics PRISM format of demographic research, and I hope that there'll be time to respond to your questions as we go along. This is the motto of every growing church that I really know in North America today, liberal or conservative, of whatever cultural background, big or small. But the board and the leaders have this engraved in their hearts. 1 Corinthians 9:22, where Paul says, I've become all things to all people, that I might by all means rescue some. And indeed, that is the story of the mission to the Gentiles in the ancient church. The Gentile mission really grew not one member at a time, but one lifestyle segment at a time, or one demographic, or one Macedonian at a time. Paul's team had a vision, a heartburst, so to speak, for a Macedonian. They then traveled there to the place of the Macedonian. They learned their food groups, they learned their music, they learned their language, they learned their lifestyles, and they adapted the gospel to communicate in the forms, the cultural forms of the people around them. And they did the same thing in Corinth, the same thing in Rome, and so on. But in the age of Christendom, that strategy has been largely abandoned. And so for a long time, the church did not seek to become all things to all people, that I might all means rescue some, but it really became one thing to a few people, so that by limited means we could keep it in the family. And in many ways, the metaphor of family church has actually been counterproductive for the Christian movement in the postmodern, post-Christendom world, because the family tended to keep us limited to certain kinds of lifestyle segments, certain kinds of ministry expectations that are comfortable and preserved a limited harmony, but which did not allow the church to adapt and reach out to the public. Your primary mission field is defined by the average distance people travel to work and shop. Now, right away in the Environic studies that uses PRISM, the Environic study tends to mislead many researchers, many pastors and congregational leaders into thinking that the limit of their primary mission field is defined by their congregational plot or by their map of where the existing members live. But in fact, if you could find the average commute distance or the average distance people travel to work and shop, today in our mobile world, people are willing to travel about the same distance to get to their spiritual destination. Now, the biggest question then that we ask as pastors and church leaders, when we even think about coming to demographics, when we even think about the diversity of publics within that primary mission field, is not what must we do to attract these people to our church, but what must we change to bless these people around us. This really is the difference between a church that does outreach ministries and a truly externally focused church. And again, this is sometimes an issue with those of us using Environics reports, because Environics, as we'll see, tends to prioritize lifestyle groups for our attention based on who's already represented in our congregation, and suggests that what we do is to increase more of these. But a truly externally focused church is willing to be radically adaptive and go very far out of their comfort zones to change tactics and do whatever it takes to bless people, even if they are already or even if they are currently underrepresented or non-represented within their congregation. So spiritually, the best way to approach demographic research is not really to ask the question, what must we do to attract people to come to our place or to come to our worship service or to join our church? But the real question is to ask, what must we change about ourselves, about our church? How must we adapt in order to bless these strangers to grace that lie outside our doors? So, generally speaking, demographic research is as if you were to hold a magnifying glass up to your postal code or up to your community. And when you do that, like any magnifying glass, it simultaneously magnifies and intensifies. It magnifies the detail of your mission field, and you begin to understand the publics around your church more than ever before. But it also allows you to intensify through the lens of your church the power of God's grace as it's uniquely focused through your congregational life and ministries to, you might say, burn and warm the hearts to change the mission field around you. Thinking of the metaphor of the lens, let me expand on that a bit. Demographic research is a lot like looking through the progressive lenses of eyeglasses or a microscope. You know that if you use a microscope, certain settings give you a deeper and deeper and deeper look into the detail of the object you're investigating. And in the same way, when you do demographic research, the broadest definition of your research is what I call basic demographics. Then you go deeper to look at life stage groups, and deeper still to analyze lifestyle segments and learn about attitudes, perspectives, and behavior patterns of individual publics around you. And then probably the deepest level of research is to investigate the heartburst affinities, the real needs, enthusiasms, and concerns of people in your primary mission field around you. And I want to spend a few moments just talking about each of those pieces. Then we'll pause for some questions, and then I'll keep going deeper into our seminar for using demographics for strategic planning. The bottom line of all of this is that your mission market, broken out into various demographics, life stage groups, and lifestyle segments, but your mission market is actually filled with what we call seekers. A seeker is someone who is broken, lost, lonely, anxious, victimized, or trapped. A seeker is someone who is physically, mentally, emotionally, or relationally broken, morally, geographically, culturally, or spiritually lost, isolated, friendless, someone who is neurotic, fearful, desperate, worried, abused, manipulated, disempowered, addicted, enslaved, imprisoned. These represent what in fact is the largest demographic segment in North America today, which is growing exponentially. And I describe it as the spiritually yearning, institutionally alienated. It is these people represented in all kinds of lifestyle groups and life stage groups who are in some way looking for God or looking for the touch of the holy, and churches have an opportunity to reach them and change their lives. Before we take a closer look at the progressive lenses of demographic, life stage groups, lifestyle segments, heartburst affinities, I'll just pause for a moment and see if there are any questions, and these can be filtered through Josephine. Do you see something there, Josephine, I should respond to?
I don't see any questions yet at the moment, Tom.
All right. Well, I didn't quite expect them, but this is just a little demonstration of how we're going to break for some questions as we go along.
And just a reminder, you're free to type comments and questions as you have them during the presentation, and then we can stop to address them at various points.
The initial look at your primary mission field probably automatically leads many church people to think about major topographic changes, transportation trends, retail evolutions and internet revolutions in your primary mission field. No matter where you are, even in fairly remote places in Canada, there are initiatives that are shaping and reshaping your space for environmental concerns. There are major transportation trends, new highways, exit ramps. There are retail evolutions with downtowns relocating, big box stores emerging, and of course everywhere in Canada is the internet revolution, new technologies and infrastructure networks. When we study demographics and we take a closer look, basic demographics really is a study of diversity in regard to age, family status, cultural background, primary language, education, occupation, income, generosity, home ownership, and mobility. And indeed, if you look at an Environics report, if you've ever obtained one for your church, the initial pages of the Environics report basically gives you data about age, family status, etc. Now, unfortunately, some of the Environics studies give you a sense of trends to the year 2016 or beyond, but mostly Environics compares the nature of your primary mission field against Canadian national benchmarks to give you an idea of the uniqueness of your particular region. Most nonprofits, businesses, retailers, government agencies, etc., actually no longer use basic demographics to develop their marketing and development strategies. They want to take a deeper look, and so they begin to look at Lifestage Groups. These are the Environics Lifestage Groups. Yes?
Tom, if I could just interrupt for a moment, I did want to add a number of our participants today have experience working with Environics reports, and we do have a couple of questions here. If perhaps I think I just missed it after we stopped for questions a few minutes ago. So the first question is, how do we move beyond ourselves?
That I hope I'll be talking about more as we go along, Dorothy. There's really two steps to moving beyond ourselves. The one really is a spiritual step, which I only alluded to at the beginning of the seminar, but it is a major issue. Because in the end, many churches look at the Environics material, they look at lifestyle segments, they know who's there, but the bottom line is they don't really, in the end, want to reach them. They don't really want to sacrifice their comfort zones to bless them. So part of this is a spiritual issue to prayerfully position people to desire, in a sense, to follow God and blessing their community. The other issue is a strategic planning issue. And in a moment, Dorothy, I'd like to share with you and explain the different the filter, different categories with which church planners are now redesigning the various ministry areas of their church to be more effective in reaching out beyond the church. I'm thinking of different ways we do hospitality, shape worship, Christian education, small groups, etc. So I hope to get that there in a moment.
Thanks, Tom. You were also talking about how we define our mission field, and so we have a question here about if our mission field is the distance our folks are willing to drive, are we in competition with our neighboring United Church congregation? Does this mission field definition imply the need to move to regional church models?
It's a question, Bill, many are asking, and two quick responses. The sense of competition between churches is really breaking down in the post-Christendom, postmodern world. We all are reaching beyond, well beyond, the original parish arenas, streets, landscape that once defined the neighborhood church. And churches are just learning to cooperate more and more together. We are not competing with the members of different churches. What we're really doing is reaching a growing population of unaligned, spiritually hungry, but institutionally alienated people. We're not stealing sheep. we're simply reaching seekers who are disconnected with everyone. That does mean that there's more and more talk within the United Church of Canada and other denominations about creating regional church models. Now, some of that is just pressured by finances and personnel, but a lot of that is also pressured by how to more effectively reach broader urbanizing areas or broader rural and remote areas. So yes, we are moving toward more regional church models the more we study shifting demographics. I'll go on. Josephine's nodding her head, I think. Okay.
Yes. I perhaps should have told you that this means my mic is down, so when it's up,
okay.
That might be a good cue for us.
I'll just pass briefly through these Lifestage groups because for many of you who use Environics reports, it is often a bit limited in what it reports to you about Lifestage groups. The reason for this is the Environic report was originally started as part of the Emerging Spirit movement of the United Church. And Emerging Spirit, by its very definition, limited itself to age 20 to 44, roughly. And so that kind of limited the Environics report. The truth is that any age group can be an emerging spirit. And if you have the opportunity to research more fully the various life stage groups, you can learn a great deal. There are a number of life stage groups, and as you can see, different publics within each life stage group. If you do the research, Environics can report some interesting detail to you. For example, I'm just looking at younger years at the moment, is what we're looking on the screen. You can see that under single scene, there's a number of different kinds of publics. Starters, nests, there's a number of different publics. The description I'm just reading now from the Environics manuals, but the 5 segments in the starters nest group, for example, are characterized by younger singles and couples who have started to marry and have children. With their mixed educations, 1/4 have completed high school, 1/3 have attended university. They have relatively downscale incomes from service sector, white-collar jobs. 30% are immigrants and slightly lower percentage are francophones. Most rent apartments, typically low-rise buildings. They walk, bike, take public transit to work. For leisure, they tend to enjoy movies, outdoor stages, nightclubs, city parks, tennis, cycling, cross-country skiing. Now you may be wondering why I read through all of this, and you want to study these descriptions very carefully. But for example, these give us clues as to kind of midweek affinity groups and small groups that we could start around crafts or entertainment or exercise or art or many other things. All these affinity groups, midweek groups, small group development, one of the major outreach strategies of growing churches today. And these are the kinds of affinities. These are how we discern some of the affinities that are there. That's just for example. There are other life stage groups, family life. I'm just kind of just briefly walking through these. Fledgling families, middle-aged achievers. Many of those are on the fringes of some of our suburban United Church, new church developments, family traditions. And if we look, for example, at a description like, family traditions, we read the 7 segments in family traditions contain middle-aged couples and families, school-aged children. The adults have parlayed moderate educations into well-paying blue-collar service sector jobs. They mostly own their own homes, single detached, mid-scale, third-generation Canadians. They tend to go to auto races, boat shows, comedy clubs. They get exercise, cross-country skiing, and so on. It's interesting to note that many of these do have above high school and professional or college training, but not in liberal arts traditions, so that much of the traditional liturgy of a church and worship that depends on history or literature is really quite foreign to them. And that's why you'll find many of these life stage groups gathering in very informal celebration services like those in some independent congregations. And many United churches are beginning to learn how to adapt their liturgies and worship to attract these kinds of people to connect with God and worship. There are other life stage groups that I won't go into detail about, we just don't have the time, but I urge you to explore these in your primary mission field. Mature years includes empty nesters, country seniors, and then later years, mature years, young and old. These are all different life stage groups in the life of a church. And I'll pause again a moment and see if you have questions about life stage groups, and particularly if you have some questions about the potential and the limitations of simply age-based demographic planning.
We have a question here, Tom, from someone who has worked with an Environics report for their own community, and he's asking, a plurality of our neighbors according to Environics reports is Buddhist, Muslim, and Jewish. We are often encouraged to convert the marginally connected affiliates of other faiths. Do you propose that we join the Jews for Jesus crowd?
No, not really. This is another spiritual preparation issue. Really part of another seminar, I think. Before a church can really begin to do strategic planning to reach out to the diversity of their mission field, they need to be very clear about their own core values and bedrock beliefs, their own faith convictions. Planners have always talked about this as the DNA of a congregation. Well, what are the core values and the core religious beliefs that you hold dear as a church? And in all of your outreach and all of your strategic planning, you need to be loyal to preserve your integrity around those values and beliefs. The integrity question's a major question because you cannot just be a chameleon and adapt to everything for everybody. There is a sense in which you have to be clear about your core message, about your own faith, about the kinds of behavioral expectations and values that you prioritize, and you are loyal to those even as you're trying to reach out and talk to the public. So I hope that's a help. There are United churches, to be honest, who have tended to try to become so much to so many people that that they often are accused of being wishy-washy about what they themselves believe or what they themselves value. And churches don't grow with that kind of lack of integrity.
Thanks, Tom. We have a second question here, a more statistical question. How large a group do we need to make effective projections from Environics data?
The Environics data, the researchers use algorithms that rely on actually a numerically fairly small pool. But I think your question perhaps might have more to do with how large a public, what is the size of the public in our primary mission field that we should prioritize in terms of outreach? Should it be a large section of the public, a small section of the public? And for that, we need to begin to look at lifestyle segments, which I'm going to do in just a moment. Usually in any given mission field, there are 3 or 4 major lifestyle segments that you might say dominate percentage-wise that particular mission field. Logically, one starts by customizing ministry to bless those larger lifestyle segments, and then you work your way through the smaller lifestyle segments. However, you may have a heartburst, a revelation of God, a motivation that is coming out of your spiritual life to bless smaller lifestyle segments, and that's certainly something that has integrity as well.
Thank you. I think I don't see any more questions at this time, so we can go on.
I want to say a little bit now about lifestyle segments and then keep going to talk about ministry applications for lifestyle segments. A lifestyle segment today is the primary, this is the key research most nonprofits, government agencies, boards of education, social services, and growing churches. This is what they're really using now to customize hospitality, Christian education strategies, worship design, outreach, and even financial planning, stewardship methodologies, church renovations and facilities, communications, and so on. So really, this probably is the most helpful kind of research for church leaders to look at. In environics, they give certain names to their lifestyle segments. A lifestyle segment is put together not just by age and income and demographic information, but it follows attitudes and behavior patterns. One of the best ways to conceive of a lifestyle segment is to go to a shopping mall and linger in the food court for a while and just observe the people who are being served at the various food outlets of the food court. You'll notice that different kinds of people gravitate to different kinds of restaurants or food outlets. And you begin to notice that Tim Hortons people are a bit different than Starbucks people, or the Taco Bell people are a bit different than McDonald's people. And they wear their hat a different way, they dress a different way, they talk a bit differently, they behave a differently. And this is beginning to give you clues to lifestyle segments. Today, organizations target lifestyle segments and customize, you might say, their products for those lifestyle segments. And here again, you see some of the names that environics give to these lifestyle segments. When you get an environics report, it will give you the different lifestyle segments that are major, not just in your congregation, but in the community. While you're thinking about some questions, I want to mention one of the limitations or concerns with the environics report is that when they list in your report, prioritizing in order of importance or size, you might say, lifestyle segments, they are reporting the lifestyle segments that are the greatest representation in your congregation, but they may not be the largest lifestyle segments in your primary mission field. You can compare, the data is there, but I'll show an example about this later, but do be careful that for many United churches, they actually are reaching the smaller lifestyle segments in their primary mission field, not the largest lifestyle segments in their primary mission field.
And Tom, we've just had some reflection here around what does it mean to be faithful servants, and I think that relates well to what you're saying. And I think sometimes we can effectively reach the smaller lifestyle segment as long as we are conscious and clear about what it is that we're doing. But I'm wondering if you have some reflection around that piece about being faithful servants and what does success mean? We talk about reaching that larger lifestyle segment, but what does success look like?
First of all, Josephine, being faithful is again kind of a DNA question. Every church, before it even begins to think about mission and outreach and so on, need to be clear about their values, beliefs, vision, and mission. Again, we call that DNA in a congregation. Now, that clarity is often missing in many established churches, and in one of my books, I describe how you can spend 9 months of intensive effort to bring clarity for that. But if you're unclear about values, beliefs, vision, and mission, it is very difficult to determine whether or not you're faithful in the first place. Does changing musical style in a worship service, is it faithful or is it unfaithful? Is changing outreach, faithful or unfaithful? You have to have a reference point, which is your values, beliefs, vision, and mission. When you define success, then, Josephine, strategic planners build on that and they define measurable outcomes in each of the ministry areas of a church, which they can use to measure or answer the question, were we successful this year? At the end of a year, a board needs to ask and answer the question, were we a success? I observe that most United Churches do not do this. At least they do it only tacitly in a hidden way. At the end of the year, what's often in the minds of a board is, well, if we balance the budget, if the pastor's salary is paid, if the property is maintained, and if everybody's happy, then we're a success. And we count that as if we're being faithful. But when a church becomes clear about their real values, beliefs, vision, and mission, they begin to define more clearly measurable outcomes that are not necessarily just measurements of financial stability and internal harmony. But those are spiritual questions.
I appreciate your reflection on that, Tom. Thank you.
I'll go on. This may press the point a bit about faithfulness and measuring success. In the end, even though you do the demographic research, there is no substitute for actually getting out of your office or out of the boardroom and out in the community to begin to look for the spiritual needs and spiritual hungers of people in your primary mission field. And there are a number of ways that churches do that. I'll just mention them. This is a way that they have a heartburst. I always ask the question, who is your Macedonian? Who is the microculture that you dream about, weep for, and stake everything you have to reach? Well, how do you find that out? Well, it's not by downloading demographic information. It's by really getting out there. Some of the tactics that I usually teach are the listening prayer triad. Another tactic which some churches use is the prayer walk, where you can observe, imagine, pray, and look at the people of your community. And I won't spend a lot of time to study those tactics, but there is no substitute to really getting out into the community to have your heart sort of burst for people that you want to reach. And then this becomes the faith question, the faithfulness question that besets a lot of churches and really is a challenge in strategic planning. Because once you really see who's out there, the question is often asked, do you really want to reach them? Do you really want to bless them? Do you really want them inside your doors? Do you really want them sharing decisions about the future of your church as an institution, and so on? Those are major questions.
I can appreciate your comments around getting to know your community. And I don't see any specific questions on this, so yes, let's charge on.
I want to come back to the lifestyle segments and spend a few moments talking about how churches think through customizing their ministries for relevance to reach the various lifestyle segments that are part of their primary mission field. And I want to introduce you into a new set of filters with which church planners are thinking about applying their demographic research. And the first set I want to look at involve leadership, hospitality, worship, education, small groups, and outreach. There are, in fact, six or seven kinds of pastors or 7 kinds of leaders. And what we're learning today is that every lifestyle segment, and there are over 60 of them in Canada, but every lifestyle segment actually has certain preferences of the kind of spiritual leader that they will gravitate toward, the kind of pastor of a church, for example, that they will gravitate toward. Traditionally, United Church seminaries, well, mainstream seminaries, have trained clergy to be caregivers and enablers. And if they grew larger than 200 people in their church, they went back to do a DMin to become a CEO. But the lifestyle segments that actually are looking for spiritual leaders to be caregivers and enablers are actually shrinking in North America today. So many more and more clergy are feeling, if I might say so, obsolete or irrelevant in their own mission fields and feeling a need to reinvent themselves. Many emerging lifestyle segments are actually looking for visionaries, disciplers, mentors, and pilgrims. And these last two, the middle two, visionary, discipler, are very common in independent, larger megachurches, and the mentor pilgrim is very common in smaller micro or house churches, and these last two may not even be ordained. But increasingly what we're seeing is that the choice of a pastor or a spiritual leader is often driven actually by the lifestyle segment's identity. In addition, there are 4 different kinds of hospitality, and growing churches are customizing their hospitality specifically to reach the lifestyle segments around them. Some segments prefer the basics. The basics is the big steel urn that brews bad coffee and insipid tea, and you serve it with creamer. But that's all people are excited about, and if you gave them more, they would feel like they were being extravagant. Many lifestyle segments today are looking for multiple choices, multiple serving stations. Some are looking for healthy choices, sugar and sugarless, dietary healthy choices versus donuts and coffee. And a number of lifestyle segments, especially those around universities or those in urban core that are very poor, are looking for hospitality that involves takeout, where they'll literally take their bag of goodies home and it may be their supper for the rest of the day. But there are different kinds of hospitality for different lifestyle segments. And what I find in many United churches is that the hospitality strategy they have been using for a decade is actually no longer relevant to the lifestyle segments around them, and that alone is blocking hospitality or blocking their ability to welcome people into the church. There are 6 different kinds of worship today that are being customized to suit individual lifestyle segments. I call these not stylistically diversified worship options, but missionally targeted worship options. There's educational worship. Educational worship tends to be for lifestyle segments that have high school to university educations. The worship service tends to be fairly wordy, fairly liturgical, has a 20-minute sermon with 3 points, usually follows the common lectionary and so on. It tends to be rather heady, rather formal. Transformational worship tends to be healing worship or recovery worship or Pentecostal worship. Transformational worship can be done with the Mormon Tabernacle Choir singing the Messiah, or it could be done with Celine Dion and Dry Ice flowing across the chancel area. I've seen transformational worship done in high Anglican liturgy with Gregorian chant and incense, and I've seen it done at the Toronto Airport Blessing, where you just pass out a lot of pillows and catch them when they're slain in the Spirit. Inspirational worship is a third kind of worship that is intended to send people out walking 5 inches off the ground, ready to take on their difficult week. Coaching worship is worship that is intended to guide people through their daily living and help them to become a better person, a better business person, a better Christian parent, and so on. I was with these worship services are often very informal. Often there's an expert lay preacher speaking on a relevant topic. I was with a church once, and their coaching worship service was at 7 a.m. in the morning, and it was topical. The topic of the day was how to help children face crises of death, divorce, and relocation. They had a funeral director, Christian, who is an expert in helping children face crises of death, and they called their worship service Cappuccino with Christ. People came and sat. They brought their kids. They drank excellent coffee. and when they left, they went out hiking on the Appalachian Trail, and there were 500, 20, and 30 somethings in the worship service. Caregiving worship services are usually smaller churches for broken people. They may be healing services. There's a lot of intercessory prayer, traveling mercies for strangers. The flowers on the table are in loving memory of someone. And mission connectional services are all about consecrating missionaries, networking via internet with missionary teams, praying for missions around the world. I only want to mention that, again, most traditional Christendom seminary-trained pastors were trained in educational and caregiving worship, but the lifestyle segments, the worship services most popular among lifestyle segments today are transformational and coaching. And many churches are adding additional worship services to meet that mission need.
Tom, we had a couple of questions related to your leadership slide a few slides back. Did you want to take those now, or could we wait till our next conversation time?
Let me take them now, as I will try to go as fast as I can to show you some examples before I'm done. But there may be some good questions here, so let's take a couple at the moment.
Mm-hmm. We had one question about being a discipler. One of your leadership options was discipler. What type of leader was Jesus or Paul?
Well, I think an argument could be made that Jesus was a leader in all 7 of these ways. Unfortunately, for normal human being pastors, most pastors can only really be 2 of these at any given time. The discipler pastor, since that was a focus, the discipler pastor is the kind of pastor that focuses less on program management and more on leader development. This is a pastor that is very good at growing people up and maturing people from a seeker who knows nothing about God or Scripture or whatever, and maturing them to know more about their spiritual gifts, their personal mission in life, and then hearing their call and responding as a minister in their own right. Some of the discipler leaders that are well known today, Rick Warren is a discipler leader, Bill Hybels is a discipler leader. But if you're looking in Canada, Mike Ward is a discipler type leader. That's the kind of leader that name escapes me at the moment, but I won't waste your time while I try to rack my memory. But that.
Thank you, Tom. And our second leadership question was about being a multi-style leader, and I think that the comment centered around how one can have one or more of these gifts. How can you be a multi-style leader when you're the only one in the area?
Most pastors I know were trained as caregivers and enablers. I was, and when I taught at Emmanuel College at the time, that's what they were training. Most pastors in the 90s began to shift their leadership to add CEO to their leadership abilities, and became more enabler CEO types and less caregiver. Many of the new immigrant pastors, African American, Asian, Korean, and so on, Chinese, that I've met in both Canada and the United States, many of them tend to be visionary pastors. And what I'm seeing today is more and more pastors are skipping going back to seminary education, and they're looking for personal coaches who can just kind of coach and mentor them to become disciplers or mentors. Now, what's driving this really, again, is lifestyle segments. Fewer and fewer lifestyle segments are looking for the pastor who's been equipped as a caregiver enabler And today, even fewer of them are looking for pastors equipped as CEOs. And many of those pastors who are CEOs are opting out of ministry and just being a CEO of a nonprofit. If lifestyle segments are looking for a spiritual leader, more and more they are tending to look for people who are visionaries, disciplers, mentors, and pilgrims. And that partly depends on whether they want to be in a mega church or a micro church. I'll go on. Time presses. So I want to skip forward and just kind of mention, you can read up on this, of course, as we adapt for different lifestyle education or lifestyle segment expectations, Christian education is evolving. You can do Christian education curricular or experiential, biblical or topical, or by generation and by peer group. Traditionally, Sunday schools have been curricular, biblical, and generational. Increasingly, lifestyle segments, particularly the more upwardly mobile lifestyle segments and second and third generation immigrant lifestyle segments, are looking for Christian education models that are experiential, topical, and peer group, which is why, for example, interactive rotational Sunday schools and so on are becoming increasingly popular among lifestyle segments that do go to church. I mentioned that small group ministry is one of the fastest growing church growth mission impact strategies in North America and indeed the world. But there are choices to be made for different lifestyle segment preferences. Some lifestyle segments prefer rotating the leaders of a group. Some prefer highly trained designated leaders. Some prefer attending a curriculum-based group, like a Bible study group or a workbook type group. And some prefer an affinity-based group around some craft, hobby, topic, issue, enthusiasm, or need. 12-step programs, for example, are affinity-based groups. So again, there are choices to be made in adapting to lifestyle segments. Outreach, there are in fact 7 different preferences among lifestyle segments for outreach. I think most of them are self-explanatory, so I won't spend our time looking at them. We've even begun to see choices related to facilities, stewardship, and communication. If you happen to be renovating your church, planting a new church, building a church, thinking about new communication strategies, or struggling with stewardship, you might be aware that certain lifestyle segments choose ecclesiastical, others utilitarian. Some look for Christendom symbols, some contemporary symbols, some for modern, some for postmodern environments. Some lifestyle segments prefer to give to unified budgets, but many lifestyle segments prefer designated giving to individual mission targets. Some lifestyle segments give because of informed philanthropy. Many other lifestyle segments prefer coaching to shape their lifestyle around tithing and Christian financial family planning. Again, this becomes a lifestyle-driven or a lifestyle segment-driven decision on the part of strategic planners in the church. And then, of course, you see different preferences for lifestyle segments in terms of communication media, which, I think they are probably self-explanatory. May I just give you some examples as our time presses, and then pause again for some final questions? Although I don't know, Josephine, how rigorous you are about time. I'm happy to spend a bit longer to talk about this, but it kind of depends, I suppose, on the program.
Well, we've generally tried to keep it to about an hour, but I think for those who are interested, I'm certainly open to continuing on, and participants certainly have the choice to sign off early if they need to do that.
Well, thank you, Josephine. I hadn't asked you about this before. I appreciate it. I want to give just a few quick examples. I did a consultation not too long ago with Trillium United Church in Cambridge, Ontario. And what we discovered is that there are certain lifestyle segments that dominate their primary mission field, and there are certain ways that they can customize their ministry in order to bless those lifestyle segments. Notice over here on the right of this picture, the lifestyle segment that's called Young Upper Middle Class Blue Collar Families in Cambridge, Ontario, they represent 24.3% of the mission area, but they only represent 18.2% of the membership of the church. An important disconnect for planners to realize in the life of that church. They are not connecting well with one of the largest mission lifestyle segments in their region. These people are young high school educated, well-paid people. They do have discretionary income for outdoor activities. They live fast-paced lives, are indulgent to their kids, have 2+ vehicles, SUVs, vans, and boats. They tend to get their coffee at Tim Hortons. They eat processed cheese. They like classic rock, and they listen to the Family Channel. They shop at Home Depot, Costco, and PetSmart. Now that's right out of the Environic study. What we also can learn from the Environic study are some interesting psychographic information. They respect authority. They have zero tolerance for bullying. They are consumer shoppers. They are fatalistic about life. And they never ever meditate on the meaning of life. Bad news for all you expository preachers. Now, how would we adapt ministry to reach these people? Well, young upper middle class blue collar families prefer utilitarian, not ecclesiastic looking facilities. And yet they love to be surrounded by traditional Christendom symbols like the cross and the Lamb of God. They like to use modern technologies like microphones and audio systems and surround sound and internet. They prefer designated giving and do not give well when a church insists on unified operating budgets. They do treasure a church that will coach them in lifestyle stewardship in Christian financial planning. They prefer print, word of mouth, micro gatherings, and cell phones to get any kind of advertising or information. Now, there's another group at Trillium in Cambridge, Ontario. Surrounding that church are working class, old and young, in industrial towns and cities. Now, the church more fully represents this group. 17.5% of these people make up the church, and they are 14.8% in the region. They're high school educated, living sustainable lives and boring jobs. They live in tight-knit communities. They rarely travel far. They use dating services and prescription painkillers. They drink beer and like hockey. They play board games and use crafts. They like mainstream rock, which gives you a clue about the kind of music that they probably are doing at this local church. They drive used cars that they maintain themselves, and a small group that was oriented around used car maintenance might work well for men in this lifestyle segment. They do telephone banking and have low debt. They postpone purchases to avoid credit card debt. They think Canadian beer is the best, which means they have a very strong nationalism or a nationalistic prejudice. They love universal health care and deplore two-tier health care plans. They shop for secondhand bargains. And what's interesting is they don't learn much from people who are different than them. If you want to reach them as a church, what we've learned, they are going to gravitate to a caregiver, enabler, minister. They prefer the basics, just basic steel-earned coffee and for refreshments. They like caregiving, a blend of caregiving, educational worship. Sunday schools, fairly traditional, generation and curricular, although it needs to be topical rather than biblical. They like rotating their leaders in small groups. And if you want to reach them with outreach, they gravitate to survival and quality of life needs. They go to ecclesiastical facilities, surround themselves with Christendom symbols and modern technologies. They do give to unified budgets. They are motivated by informed philanthropy, and you reach them through these communication strategies. Now, I know I'm pressing our time, but just to keep giving you some examples. Another group surrounding Trillium United Church in Cambridge are young, low-income, mobile city singles. Environics will tell us that they have a high school or less education, single parents. They live on survival incomes. Many of them are in transportation industries, truck drivers, etc. There are TV couch potatoes. They knit, play lotteries, watch NASCAR, listen to hard rock, shop at Walmart, eat at Taco Bell. They drive used cars, use Canadian Tire maintenance. They don't fix them themselves. And they use check cashing services for advances on their checks. They rarely exercise, don't enjoy formal occasions, have difficulty managing their time, have a strong sense of nationalism, and are disconnected from society. How are we going to reach them, the church asks? Well, they need a pastor who's not a caregiver or a CEO, but they need someone who's a mentor and a pilgrim, someone who can sit down at Tim Hortons or at Taco Bell and spend a lot of time talking about their experience with Christ and their spiritual journey through life. They're looking for just the basics, but they like takeout for their hospitality because they want the food at home. They gravitate to addiction recovery worship. That's transformational worship, Pentecostal type worship, but for a higher power to intervene to liberate them from their alcoholism. Or they gravitate to highly inspirational worship, which could be probably in kind of a hard rock kind of a sound. If their children go to Sunday school, it's very traditional. If they go to a small group, they prefer a designated trained leader because they have low self-esteem and don't think that they could take their turn to do it. And they look for biblical small groups, not affinity groups. They're into survival, recovery, and quality of life kind of outreach ministries. Now, I could share with you some other examples.
We do have one question.
There's young, low-income, mobile city singles.
Scrolling to it here. How do you see the application of the affirming ministry model encompassing the lifestyles?
But I won't. Our time is kind of coming to an end quickly, so I'll pause a moment and see what questions you might have. I have worked with, for example, I helped coach Brent Hawks at Metropolitan Community Church in downtown Toronto, and a number of affirming churches of the United Church. One of the great things about Metropolitan Community Church in Toronto is their ability to do exactly what we've been discussing. They are very good at interpreting the demographic and lifestyle segment information and adapting hospitality, small groups, Christian education, and worship options for different publics and peoples. You'll notice that there is no lifestyle segment per se that defines sexual orientation, because looking at it this way, the gay, lesbian, transgendered, that sort of life and lifestyle truly is an alternative lifestyle, an alternative way of being that permeates all of the 60-plus lifestyle segments in Canada. So this is not sexual orientation is not a lifestyle segment. It is a way of being that permeates all lifestyle segments. And an affirming church, as liberal as they are, still desires to bless all kinds of people in all lifestyle segments,
about the worship
which is why the fastest growing
whether
demographic
that information was available in the Environics reports. Now I note that you have a little bit on that,
is not homosexual
in
folks,
your handout.
but heterosexual.
So for those of you who have that handout, that information is there. I don't see any other questions at this time. So I think we can press through. Okay, and I see that Tom has probably inadvertently left us. Must have been automatically set for the end of the webinar there. We'll just give him a few moments to come back on. I do have a copy of his PowerPoint presentation. Well, and we have our presenter with his hand raised, so we will just get him set up here. As we always say, technology is wonderful when it works. We'll try this one more time. He seems to be signing on and off, and that's really unfortunate for us tonight. If you don't have a copy of the handout, do feel free to give me your email address and I can forward that to you. Someone has asked whether we can also have a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, and I'm sure Tom will make that available, but I will confirm that with him as soon as I'm able to do that. And to answer your question, Bill, about whether Tom books Thriving Church Consulting to cover this material, I don't know the answer to that, but hopefully perhaps we can get that material out on the website, the answer to that. So we have one more request for handout. And I see that Tom might be back again. There he is. Okay, we'll just give him a moment to come back on. Thank you so much for your patience, and it is 10 minutes after 8 o'clock here, so we'll just take a few more moments to wrap up and to finish the rest of Tom's presentation if we're able to do that. Tom, can you hear us?
Everything, but I couldn't
I can
speak.
hear you. It's good to have you back. Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
All right. So I did hear the comments and questions. Thanks, Josephine.
Oh, well, we've lost your video there too, so if you could set that up again, that would be great.
Email address, tgbandy@aol.com. I also have a Skype address, tgbandy, and I'm always glad to email and talk with participants in any of my seminars. Thrivingchurch.com has a lot of downloadable material and video clips if you visit there. And I do work with churches and coach pastors as you struggle to interpret environics reports and customize ministries. So I would be glad to take any questions by email.
Tom,
yes, I can
Tom,
give you the PowerPoint
would you be able to give us your email address again? I'll type it in the box, and then for those who would like access to the PowerPoint presentation or more information from you, perhaps they can email you directly.
Very simple to remember. Thank you, everyone, for joining me in the seminar. Thanks for your patience to stay a little bit later, and especially for that final glitch at the end. And thanks, Josephine, for your help in coordinating this.
You're welcome, and a special thank you to you, Tom, tonight for joining us and for preparing this presentation on and for inspiring us and encouraging us to really listen to the needs of our community and to ask those discerning questions of what need we as a congregation, as a community, are called to meet, and how we can use the research and demographic analysis available to us to help us in that endeavor. So you've certainly given us a lot of information and things to ponder in our ministries. So just a reminder to all our participants, a recorded version of this webinar will be available within the next week, and you will be able to forward that on to any of your friends or co-workers who weren't able to join us tonight. I will be sending out a link to our feedback form following the webinar. We invite you to fill that in as well, and also to check out the list of webinars that we have coming up in the next few weeks. So once again, thank you to you, Tom, and thank you to all of you for joining us tonight.
Well, just again, thanks everyone, and I'll look forward to talking with you perhaps at a future date.
Click on the
God
X
bless.
at the top right of the screen, and Tom, I'll give you the last word. Okay, good night.